Hey, good morning, guys. Remember, we were here about 2 weeks ago when hotel and airport workers fought for that Olympic wage, $30 an hour. They got it, and now they're rallying this morning to keep it. Turns out that the companies who employ those workers are fighting back with a petition saying, hey, now's not the time.
City council members and union leaders say these raises are still barely enough for a living wage in LA. The minimum wage for LA airport and hotel workers is right now around $20 an hour. Starting this summer, the raises kick in. By the time the Olympics arrive, workers will earn $30 an hour. That's a 56% raise over 3 years.
Something unusual is happening in Los Angeles. The city recently introduced a new wage policy that raised the minimum pay for certain tourism and hotel workers to $22.50 per hour, one of the highest wage floors for the sector in the United States. The policy was designed to help workers keep up with the rising cost of living in one of the country's most expensive metropolitan areas. But early reports suggest the change may already be influencing how some businesses operate. According to several industry discussions, a number of hotels and tourism-related companies began reviewing their staffing structures shortly after the rule took effect. Some estimates suggest that employment across parts of the sector may have declined by around 6%, a figure that quickly attracted attention from economists, business organizations, and labor advocates. Supporters of the policy argue the increase could improve financial stability for workers employed in hospitality and tourism, especially in cities where housing, transportation, and everyday expenses continue to rise. Higher wages, they say, may help workers better manage the cost of living in major urban areas. Critics, however, raise a different concern. They argue that when labor costs increase rapidly, smaller businesses with limited margins may face financial pressure. In service industries like hospitality,
You know, this threatens the revenue Los Angeles urgently needs, not to mention it's standing as a world-class host for global events like the Olympics. Small businesses will be forced to shut down, workers will lose their jobs, and the economic fallout will stretch across the city. We're fighting for all of it, the city's future, the jobs that sustain our communities, and the millions of guests the tourism industry proudly serves year after year.
companies typically respond to rising costs in a few predictable ways. Some increase prices, others adjust operating hours, and some restructure staffing levels in order to keep expenses aligned with revenue. Because of these competing perspectives, Los Angeles is now being closely watched by economists and policy analysts. The city may become an important real-world example of how wage policy can influence hiring patterns, business decisions, and the broader labor market.
Tourism officials and hotel executives say the increases are going to lead to big cuts in staff, investments in new projects, and could even disrupt the Olympics.
Los Angeles is not the first city where this debate has unfolded. A similar situation emerged in Seattle, where rising minimum wage policies in parts of the local economy led many businesses to rethink how they operated.
But hotels and businesses at LAX say the increase will make a bad situation worse. They say they're still recovering from the pandemic, and tourism is down even more from the impact of the LA fires and fears about tariffs.
At the time, supporters believed the policy would strengthen worker incomes and improve financial stability for employees in service industries. But as the changes rolled out, some companies began adjusting their operations. Industry reports suggested that a number of businesses responded by modifying work schedules, limiting operating hours, or reorganizing staffing structures.
Just to stay in business, the owners are paying $4 million a year just to stay in business.
The 4 Point Sheraton LAX, they closed their doors on April 29th and laid off 191 people. And this is completely against where we need to head in terms of making sure that we're ready.
It's the end of an era in West Seattle.
Oh, no. This was my dream, to own my...
In some cases, certain locations chose to close entirely. These developments quickly sparked a wider conversation about how wage policies influence real-world business decisions. One of the most frequently reported adjustments involved reducing employee hours. By shortening shifts or restructuring weekly schedules, some employers said they could manage higher payroll expenses while continuing to operate. Surveys conducted by local business groups indicated that several owners expected to make additional changes as the financial impact of the policy became clearer over time.
Karina Lukenbach opened up her business. She served breakfast to the West Seattle community for years.
Meanwhile, Los Angeles introduced its own wage plan in late 2024, focused specifically on workers in hotels, motels, and airport-related services. The policy increases hourly pay gradually, with a long-term target of reaching $30 per hour by 2028. Supporters argue the plan could help hospitality workers better manage the high cost of living in Southern California. Critics, however, question whether businesses operating in competitive tourism markets will be able to absorb the higher labor costs. Because of that uncertainty, some hotel operators say they are already reviewing staffing levels, pricing strategies, and long-term investment plans as they prepare for the next stages of the policy rollout. The debate surrounding wage policy has also expanded beyond the hospitality industry itself. Across California, businesses in several sectors have been dealing with rising operating costs, including higher expenses related to energy, transportation, insurance, and regulatory compliance. For many analysts, the developments in cities like Los Angeles and Seattle provide an opportunity to observe how wage policies interact with broader economic pressures. Those pressures are not limited to hotels and tourism. In other parts of the state's economy, some business leaders have also raised concerns about the long-term impact of increasing operational expenses. A few refinery operators, for example, have publicly discussed the financial challenges created by higher compliance costs and changing market conditions. When companies begin evaluating whether certain facilities remain economically sustainable, those discussions are closely followed by employees, investors, and local communities. Back in the hospitality sector, the Los Angeles Wage Ordinance affects approximately 150 hotels, with a combined total of around 40,000 rooms. After the initial $22.50 hourly wage level was introduced, one industry report suggested employment across parts of the sector declined by about 6%. That estimate quickly became one of the most discussed numbers in the broader policy debate. Supporters of the wage increase say the policy is intended to gradually improve earnings for workers in a city where living costs remain among the highest in the United States. From their perspective, higher pay could help hospitality employees better manage expenses related to housing, transportation, and everyday necessities. Critics interpret the early data differently. Some believe the job decline may reflect how businesses respond when operating costs rise faster than expected. Economists often note that wages in service industries typically emerge from a balance between business expenses, consumer demand, and available labor. When pay levels are set through legislation rather than direct negotiation between employers and employees, companies sometimes adjust in other areas, such as pricing, staffing levels, or operating hours. Because Los Angeles is implementing its policy gradually, with a target of $30 per hour by 2028, many analysts say the full economic effects may only become visible over the next several years. Some of the earliest indicators of change have come from industry surveys. One hospitality education and research organization surveyed 92 hotel owners in Los Angeles. According to the findings, job reductions began appearing not long after the wage ordinance took effect. While the survey represents only a portion of the market, the results quickly drew attention within the hospitality sector. The same survey also suggested that about 62% of respondents were considering reducing employee hours over the following year. Hotel operators cited rising labor expenses and broader operating costs as key reasons for reviewing their staffing strategies. For many properties, possible adjustments include shorter shifts, fewer scheduled hours, or reorganizing departments in order to adapt to the new wage structure. Industry estimates suggest that the 6% employment decline reported earlier could represent roughly 650 positions across the affected hotels. Analysts also note that the largest wage adjustment in the policy timeline has not occurred yet. Another increase is scheduled for July, which means the full economic impact may still be developing. That timeline matters because many businesses are still in the early stages of adapting to the policy. In hospitality, where payroll expenses represent a significant share of operating costs, even gradual wage changes can influence long-term financial planning. For many companies, the central question ultimately becomes sustainability. Businesses, particularly those responsible to investors, must maintain a balance between revenue and expenses over time. When operating costs rise faster than income, management teams often begin reviewing whether certain services, departments, or locations remain financially practical. Similar patterns have also appeared in parts of the retail sector. In some areas, store owners have reported operational challenges such as rising security costs, repeated store disruptions, and higher insurance expenses. When those pressures combine with declining revenue, companies sometimes decide to close locations or shift operations to other regions. When businesses close locations, the reasons are rarely tied to a single factor. Economic conditions, operating costs, local demand, and policy decisions can all play a role. Because of that, discussions about store closures often evolve into broader debates about how cities balance economic growth, regulation, and business investment.
The situation unfolding in Los Angeles highlights one of the central questions policymakers face: how to raise wages for workers while also maintaining an environment where businesses can continue operating and expanding. Economists often note that the outcome depends not only on policy design, but
also on how companies respond as new regulations take effect. More broadly, the debate surrounding wage policy reflects a larger economic principle. When long-standing business structures shift quickly, the effects can appear in unexpected areas of the local economy. One example frequently mentioned in public discussions involves retail access in certain neighborhoods. When grocery stores close, residents sometimes find themselves traveling much farther to reach the nearest location. Situations like this often trigger wider conversations about how local policy, enforcement practices, and business conditions interact. Business groups sometimes argue that companies leave areas when operational challenges begin affecting long-term stability. These challenges can include rising security costs, repeated disruptions inside stores, higher insurance expenses, or inventory losses that accumulate over time. When those pressures combine with declining revenue, corporate leaders may conclude that relocating operations is the most practical option. Even after a store closes, the debate usually continues. Some community members believe businesses should remain and invest more heavily in local neighborhoods. Others argue that companies can only stay when economic conditions allow them to operate sustainably. As a result, discussions about closures often involve many competing perspectives. Meanwhile, hotel operators in Los Angeles are continuing to monitor the city's wage policy closely. A survey commissioned by the Hotel Association of Los Angeles reported that some owners believe the new pay structure is already influencing their financial outlook. According to the survey, several hotels are reviewing staffing levels, employee hours, and optional services as they adapt to higher labor costs. In some cases, operators have discussed scaling back smaller amenities, such as on-site restaurants or gift shops, if those services are unable to cover their operating expenses. For many hotel operators, the strategy moving forward centers on focusing resources on core operations. By prioritizing their most essential services while scaling back less profitable departments, some businesses say they hope to remain financially stable as the wage policy continues to unfold over the next several years. At the same time, attention is already turning toward the next stage of the policy rollout. The following wage adjustment is scheduled for July 2026, and many operators say they are reviewing their financial projections in advance of that change. Understanding how the next increase could affect operating costs has become an important part of long-term planning. One of the most immediate considerations involves staffing strategy. In service industries like hospitality, payroll expenses represent a significant portion of total operating costs. As wages rise, companies sometimes review shift schedules, department sizes, and staffing levels in order to keep expenses aligned with revenue. Pricing decisions may also play a role. When operating costs increase, particularly labor costs, businesses often reassess how much they charge customers. Industry analysts note that room rates in competitive tourism markets frequently reflect underlying changes in operating expenses, meaning higher labor costs can gradually influence pricing strategies. Beyond daily operations, hotel owners are also reconsidering long-term investment plans. Projects such as constructing new hotels, expanding existing properties, or completing major renovations typically require substantial capital commitments. When future costs become harder to predict, companies sometimes delay those investments until market conditions become clearer. For now, many operators appear to be taking a cautious approach. Instead of moving forward with large expansion projects, some businesses are focusing on smaller operational adjustments while monitoring tourism demand. With several major international events expected to take place in Los Angeles in the coming years, increased visitor activity could eventually play an important role in shaping the industry's outlook. At the same time, the wage policy continues to generate debate among different groups connected to the industry. Several hospitality trade organizations have encouraged policymakers to reconsider certain aspects of the ordinance, arguing that rapid cost increases could influence long-term business sustainability. Labor organizations, however, maintain that higher wages are necessary to help workers manage the rising cost of living in major cities. Some companies have already responded to the uncertainty by adjusting their investment plans. In one reported case, a developer paused a proposed hotel expansion shortly after the policy was approved, citing concerns about how future operating costs might affect the project's financial outlook. Large hospitality developments typically involve years of planning and substantial capital investment. Because of that, even relatively small changes in long-term cost projections can influence whether companies move forward with new projects or choose to wait until economic conditions become more predictable. In practice, businesses usually have only a limited number of ways to respond when operating costs increase. Companies may review staffing levels, adjust prices, scale back underperforming services, or evaluate whether certain locations remain financially sustainable. These types of adjustments are common across many industries whenever economic conditions shift. As Los Angeles gradually moves toward its long-term $30 per hour wage target, city officials, business leaders, and workers are all watching closely to see how the hospitality sector evolves. Because the policy will be implemented over several years, analysts say the full economic impact may only become visible with time. Supporters of the policy continue to emphasize a central point. Wages in major cities should reflect the high cost of living. In places like Los Angeles, where housing, transportation, and everyday expenses remain elevated, advocates believe higher pay could improve financial stability for workers in tourism and hospitality. Critics of the policy, however, raise a different concern. They argue that if operating costs rise faster than revenue, some businesses may eventually respond by reducing staff positions, limiting expansion plans, or adjusting their operations. That tension between improving worker income and maintaining business sustainability has become one of the central questions in the debate. Economists often describe situations like this as policy ripple effects. When new regulations change cost structures within an industry, companies sometimes adapt in ways that were not initially expected. Those adjustments can include operational changes, shifts in hiring patterns, or reductions in optional services that are no longer financially practical. Because of that, the early estimate of roughly a 6% decline in jobs within parts of Los Angeles' hospitality sector has attracted significant attention. Some analysts view the number as a possible warning signal about how businesses respond to rising costs. Others believe it may simply represent short-term adjustments as companies reorganize under the new rules. With several years remaining before the policy reaches its final wage target, the long-term outcome is still developing. For many observers, Los Angeles may ultimately become an important case study in how wage policies interact with business decisions, labor markets, and the broader urban economy. Another factor could soon influence the situation as well. Los Angeles is preparing to host major global events, including the upcoming Olympic Games, which are expected to attract millions of visitors from around the world. Large international events typically increase demand for hotels, restaurants, and transportation services, potentially strengthening the local tourism economy during the same period that wage changes are being implemented. That possibility adds another layer to the debate. Policymakers in cities like Los Angeles and Seattle are attempting to balance several complex priorities at once: improving worker income, maintaining business sustainability, and supporting long-term economic growth. Achieving that balance is rarely simple, and the results often take years to fully understand. For now, economists, business leaders, and labor organizations continue to study how these policies unfold in real time. The outcome could influence how other cities approach similar wage discussions in the future. If you enjoy content that explores major economic trends and policy changes, consider subscribing and enabling notifications so you don't miss the next analysis.